What if the woman you trusted with your deepest secrets was secretly plotting to steal your life? For Amelia Sterling, her husband's brilliant assistant, Chloe, was a godsend, a helping hand during a difficult and lonely pregnancy. She brought her artisanal teas from the Mandarin Oriental, managed her overwhelming schedule, and listened for hours with a sympathetic ear. But as Amelia's belly grew, so did a dark, elaborate scheme nurtured in the shadows of their opulent New York penthouse. Chloe didn't just want a promotion. She wanted the wife's seat at the table, the sterling name, the entire empire. And she was one whispered lie, one perfectly timed tear away from getting it all. Never suspecting that the quiet old woman in the corner, the powerful matriarch of the Sterling family, heard every venomous word. The silence in the Sterling penthouse was a specific kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, sound-dampened hush of extreme wealth, where the thick pile of hand-knotted silk rugs, the sheer altitude of being 50 stories above Manhattan, and the weight of unspoken expectations swallowed every noise. For Amelia, this silence had become a breeding ground for anxiety. She sat curled on a sprawling sofa that had likely cost more than her parents' first home, a soft cashmere throw draped over her legs. Her hand rested protectively on the taut swell of her belly, where their son, kicked with a restless energy she wished she possessed. 7 months. The journey had been fraught with complications, a bout of placenta previa gestational diabetes, and the ever-present bone-deep exhaustion that left her feeling like a ship lost in a fog. Her husband, Adrian Sterling, was a good man. He was kind, his love for her a steady if sometimes distant star. But he was a man forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. The CEO of Sterling Holdings, a real estate empire that devoured his time and energy with a relentless appetite. He would come home late smelling of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of the city kiss her forehead, ask about her day in a voice already half asleep, and collapse into bed. He loved her, she knew. But he wasn't here. Not really. Into this void stepped Chloe. Chloe Dubois was Adrian's executive assistant, a woman so perfectly assembled she seemed almost scientifically engineered for success. With hair the color of dark honey, eyes a startling shade of blue, and a mind that moved with the speed and precision of a supercomputer, she was indispensable to Adrian. And over the past few months, she had made herself indispensable to Amelia too. "I brought you that new blend from the Mandarin Oriental," Chloe would say, her voice a soothing melody, as she entered the apartment, always looking impeccable in a Tom Ford sheath dress. "It's a white peony tea with hints of rosehip, supposed to be wonderful for third trimester fatigue." She would arrange the tea service on the marble coffee table, her movements fluid and sure. She'd listen as Amelia confessed her fears about childbirth, her anxieties about motherhood, her loneliness. Chloe would nod her expression, a mask of perfect empathy. "Adrian is just so consumed by the new Hudson Yards project." Chloe would offer a subtle defense that also served to highlight his absence. "He feels terrible he can't be here more. He told me just yesterday, 'Chloe, I don't know what I'd do without you keeping things running for Amelia.'" Amelia would soak it in a pang of gratitude, mixing with a faint, unplaceable unease. She was grateful for the help for the company. But sometimes when Chloe's gaze lingered a moment too long on a family portrait, or when she answered a question about Adrian's schedule with an intimacy that felt almost proprietary, a tiny alarm bell would sound in the back of Amelia's mind. She always silenced it. It was the hormones, she told herself, the paranoia of a high-risk pregnancy. Chloe was a friend. She was a lifesaver. Today, however, the alarm bell was ringing a little louder. Chloe was organizing the baby shower, an extravagant affair Amelia had wanted to be a simple brunch, but which had, under Chloe's enthusiastic guidance, morphed into a full-scale production. "I've confirmed the floral arrangements from Belle Fleur," Chloe said, tapping away on her iPad, her back to Amelia. "And the caterers have the final menu. I took the liberty of adding the miniature croque monsieurs that Adrian loves so much. I thought it would be a nice touch, a way to make him feel included, even if he's only there for an hour." "That's Overhears." "Thoughtful, Chloe." Amelia murmured, her tea growing cold. It was thoughtful. So why did it feel like a calculated move in a game she didn't understand? The final piece of their domestic puzzle had arrived a week ago. Beatrice Sterling, Adrian's mother, the Dowager Queen, as some of the society papers called her. Beatrice was a woman carved from old-world granite, her posture impeccable, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon. She moved through the penthouse with a quiet authority, her presence a silent judgment on the modern minimalist decor Adrian had chosen. She spoke little, her observations filtered through shrewd, assessing eyes. Beatrice had announced she was staying until the baby was born, a declaration, not a request. Her official reason was to support Amelia. Her unofficial reason, Amelia suspected, was to ensure the Sterling heir was brought into the world with the appropriate degree of order and propriety. She sat now in a wing-back chair across the room, ostensibly reading a biography of Catherine the Great. But Amelia could feel her mother-in-law's attention like a physical touch. Beatrice did not like Chloe. She had never said a word, but her civility was so brittle it was an insult in itself. When Chloe spoke, Beatrice's eyes would become flat and opaque. When Chloe offered her tea, she would politely decline. "Amelia, darling," Chloe said, turning around, her face aglow with a manufactured warmth. "I was thinking about the nursery, that antique silver rattle we saw at Harrods online. I know it's extravagant, but it would be a perfect family heirloom, don't you think?" "It is lovely," Amelia agreed, feeling a fresh wave of fatigue. She didn't want a Harrods rattle. She wanted her husband to come home before 10 p.m. She wanted to feel like this was her home, her baby, her life. "I'll have it messengered over," Chloe declared, making a note. "Consider it a little gift from me." From across the room, a page in Beatrice's book turned with a sound like cracking ice. The old woman's gaze lifted, settling on Chloe's back for a fleeting second. Her expression was unreadable, but in the depths of her cool grey eyes, a storm was gathering. She had seen women like Chloe before. Women with bright, hungry eyes and perfectly manicured hands that were expert at climbing. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Chloe wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder. She was trying to climb into her son's bed and into his wife's shoes. The silence in the penthouse was about to be broken. The days leading up to the baby shower became Chloe's masterpiece of subtle sabotage. She operated not with a sledgehammer, but with the delicate, poisoned needle of a master manipulator. Her goal was twofold: to isolate Amelia emotionally, and to reframe her in Adrian's eyes from a beloved wife into an unstable hormonal burden. It began with the flowers. Amelia had mentioned offhandedly that she loved the simple beauty of white hydrangeas. Chloe, in her capacity as the shower planner, filled the apartment with them. They were everywhere, great billowing clouds of white on every surface. "A little surprise," Chloe announced cheerfully, "to brighten your day." That evening, when Adrian came home, he sneezed. "God, the pollen," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. "What is all this? They're hydrangeas." Amelia said, her voice small. "I like them. "There are 1,000,000 of them, Ames," he said, not unminduldulla, but with an edge of irritation. "My allergies are going crazy." He disappeared into the master bathroom, and the sound of the shower was a wall between them. The next morning, Chloe arrived early. "Oh my goodness," she said, her hand flying to her mouth in performative horror. "Adrian's allergies I completely forgot. He mentioned it once years ago." "Oh, Amelia, I'm so sorry. I should have asked. You must think I'm so thoughtless." "It's fine," Amelia mumbled, but the damage was done. Chloe had created a problem, blamed herself to appear innocent, and in the process reinforced the idea that she, not Amelia, was the one who remembered the small, intimate details about Adrian. The serpent's whispers grew more venomous. Chloe began to confide in Amelia, a twisted form of intimacy that was actually psychological warfare. "I hate to even say this," Chloe began one afternoon, settling onto the ottoman at Amelia's feet, her expression a perfect portrait of concern. "But I'm worried about Adrian. He seems so distant lately. He snapped at me in a meeting today. It was nothing really, I have a thick skin, but it wasn't like him. The pressure of this deal and everything else must be immense. Please don't worry, though. I'm handling as much as I can for him." The implication was clear. Everything else was Amelia and the baby. The seed was planted. When Adrian was distant that evening, Amelia didn't see a tired husband. She saw a man pulling away just as Chloe had predicted. Simultaneously, Chloe was painting a different picture for Adrian. She would catch him in the moments before he left the office, her voice low and confidential. "Just a heads up, Adrian," she'd say, her hand briefly touching his arm. Amelia had a bit of a rough day. She was crying this afternoon, something about the color of the nursery wallpaper. "She's feeling very overwhelmed. I told her you were under incredible stress and to not take it personally if you were a little quiet tonight." I tried to reassure her. So when Adrian came home to a withdrawn Amelia, he didn't see a lonely pregnant woman craving connection. He saw the fragile, weepy creature Chloe had described. He became cautious, tiptoeing around her, his attempts to be gentle only widening the chasm between them. Communication already strained, fractured completely. Beatrice watched it all. She saw the way Chloe's gifts for Amelia were always subtly wrong, a rich pastry that would spike her gestational diabetes, a scented candle too strong for her heightened sense of smell. She saw the way Chloe would subtly rearrange things in the apartment, moving Adrian's reading glasses from the shared living room to his private study. A small act of claiming territory. One afternoon, Beatrice was in the library, a room Amelia rarely used when Chloe entered with a stack of mail. Believing herself to be alone, Chloe's professional mask slipped. She walked over to Adrian's large mahogany desk, her movements slow and sensuous. She ran a hand over the back of his leather chair, her fingers tracing the indentation where his head would rest. She picked up a framed photo of Adrian and Amelia from their wedding day. She stared at it for a long moment, but her gaze was fixed only on Adrian. A strange, hungry expression crossed her face, an unsettling mix of adoration and avarice. Then, with a faint, contemptuous smile, she placed the photo face down on the desk before quickly righting it as she heard a floorboard creak. Beatrice remained perfectly still behind a towering shelf of books, her heart turning to a cold, hard stone. This was no mere assistant. This was a predator. Amelia's own suspicions, long suppressed, were beginning to surface. One evening, Chloe stayed late to finalize details for the shower. As she was leaving, her phone, lying on the kitchen island, lit up with a notification. It was a text message. Amelia glanced over and her blood ran cold. The text was from a contact named A. The message read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're intoxicating." Amelia's breath hitched. Adrian. Her mind reeled. Last night, Adrian was home last night. He was in bed with me. Chloe snatched the phone up, her movements jerky. "My sister," she said a little too quickly, not meeting Amelia's eyes. "She's a drama queen." She offered a brittle laugh and practically fled the apartment. Amelia stood alone in the vast kitchen, the silence pressing in on her. Last night, Adrian had been there, but he'd been asleep when she came to bed. Or had he been? He often worked on his laptop after she drifted off. Her mind, already a fertile ground for anxiety, was now a whirlwind of doubt and fear. She wanted to confront him, to scream at him. But Chloe's conditioning had worked its magic. A voice in her head, a voice that sounded remarkably like Chloe's, whispered, "You're being hormonal. Paranoid. You'll just push him away." She said nothing. She carried the poison of her suspicion into her bedroom and lay beside her husband, feeling like a stranger. Beatrice, sensing the shift in Amelia's demeanor, knew the time for passive observation was over. She had to talk to her son. She found him in his study, nursing a glass of scotch. "Adrian," she began, her voice even, "we need to talk about Chloe." Adrian sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Mother, please." "Not you too. Chloe is a godsend. She's holding everything together while Amelia is unwell. I don't know how we'd manage without her. You're from a different generation. You don't understand these modern working relationships." "I understand people, Adrian," Beatrice said, her voice sharp. "And that woman does not have your best interests at heart. She is creating discord between you and your wife." "She's supporting my wife," Adrian countered, his voice rising. "Amelia is the one who is emotional and irrational right now. Chloe is the only one who seems to understand what I'm going through." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. Beatrice looked at her son, at the weary lines around his eyes, and saw not a powerful CEO but a fool being expertly played. He was blind. He wouldn't listen to her warnings. She left the study, her resolve hardening into something sharp and dangerous. If her son was a fool, she would have to be the one to open his eyes, and she would need more than just intuition. She would need irrefutable proof. She returned to her room, closed the door, and made a phone call to a man she hadn't spoken to in years, a private investigator, the best in the business. The time for subtlety was over. The hunt had begun. Chloe's campaign of psychological warfare intensified. Her next move was an act of audacious, calculated cruelty designed to humiliate Amelia and cement her reputation as incompetent in the eyes of the Sterling family's powerful social circle. Amelia was the honorary chair of the annual Blooms for Babies charity gala, a position she had inherited from Beatrice. It was her one remaining connection to a life outside the suffocating luxury of the penthouse. The event was weeks away, but the seating chart for the top-tier donors was a complex and delicate puzzle. Amelia had spent days working on it, carefully balancing corporate rivalries and social alliances. The finalized chart, a multi-page document annotated with her neat handwriting, lay on the dining room table. Chloe, of course, offered to help by having the chart professionally calligraphed. "It will be my contribution, Amelia," she said with a brilliant smile. "One less thing for you to worry about." Reluctantly, Amelia agreed. 2 days later, Chloe returned the chart, now a beautiful piece of art on thick cardstock. That evening, just as Adrian was walking in the door, Chloe, who was ostensibly there to drop off the chart, was helping Amelia with a glass of cranberry juice. With a theatrical gasp and a clumsy stumble that was anything but Chloe's arm, knocked the full glass of dark red juice directly onto the pristine seating chart. The dark stain bled across the calligraphy, obliterating names and turning the meticulous plan into a useless, soggy mess. "Oh my God, Amelia, I am so sorry," Chloe cried, dabbing at the mess with a napkin, only making it worse. "I'm so clumsy. This is a disaster. The gala committee needed this by tomorrow morning." Amelia stared speechless, the blood draining from her face. Adrian, walking in on the scene, saw exactly what Chloe had intended him to see: a frantic, flustered assistant and his wife standing over a ruined project. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. "It was my fault, Adrian. All my fault," Chloe said, tears welling in her eyes. "I spilled juice on the seating chart Amelia was working on." Amelia opened her mouth to protest. "I finished it days ago. You were just returning it." But Adrian spoke first, his voice sharp with frustration. "For God's sake, Amelia, this is the one thing you had to manage. The Blooms for Babies Gala is my mother's legacy. Now what are we going to do?" "I can fix it," Chloe interjected, her voice full of can-do spirit. "I have the original file on my laptop. I can stay up all night and recreate it. I remember most of the placements. Don't you worry, Adrian. I'll handle it." He looked from Chloe's determined, capable face to his wife's pale, shocked one. "Thank you, Chloe," he said, his relief palpable. "I don't know what we'd do without you." He shot Amelia a look of profound disappointment before turning and walking into his study, the door closing with a definitive click. Amelia was left standing in the wreckage, not of a seating chart, but of her husband's faith in her. Chloe's apology was a masterpiece of malice, a public declaration of Amelia's incompetence and her own indispensability. The isolation was now nearly complete. Amelia retreated further into herself. She felt a growing paranoia that felt anything but irrational. She started noticing things, the way a bottle of her prenatal vitamins seemed to be emptier than it should be, the way Chloe would casually ask about the security codes for the Hamptons estate, just in case Adrian needs me to send something out there. The breaking point came during a staged argument. Chloe, knowing Adrian was due home any minute, began a seemingly innocent conversation with Amelia about the baby's name. "I know you love the name Samuel," Chloe said gently. "But I happened to overhear Adrian on the phone with his father the other day. It seems Samuel was the name of a business rival who nearly ruined his grandfather. He said it would bring back terrible memories. He was probably afraid to tell you and upset you." Amelia, who had cherished the name for months, felt a fresh stab of pain. It was another secret, another thing Adrian had shared with Chloe, but not with her. "Why wouldn't he just tell me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling with unshed tears. "He wants to protect you," Chloe soothed. "He's trying so hard." At that exact moment, the penthouse door opened. Adrian walked in to see his wife's tear-streaked face. "What now?" he asked, his voice weary. Before Amelia could speak, Chloe turned to him, her own eyes glistening. "She's upset about the name Samuel. Adrian, I think you have to tell her the truth about your grandfather." Amelia stared at Chloe, horrified. Chloe had manufactured this entire confrontation. "What are you talking about?" Adrian asked, looking genuinely confused. "What about my grandfather?" "The business rival, Samuel." Chloe prompted, her confident facade faltering for the first time. Adrian shook his head. "My grandfather's rival was named Morris. I have no idea what you're talking about. I love the name Samuel." The air went still. Chloe's face paled. She had overplayed her hand, inventing a lie, so specific it was easily disproven. Amelia looked from Chloe's panicked expression to her husband's bewildered one, and for the first time in months, the fog of manipulation began to clear. It wasn't hormones. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. This woman was actively trying to destroy her marriage. "You," Amelia whispered, her voice low and shaking with a nascent rage. "You made that up." Chloe quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. "Oh my God, I must have completely misheard him. Morris, Samuel, all those old names, with everything going on. My mind is a sieve. I am so sorry for the confusion." She turned to Adrian. "See what I mean? The stress is getting to all of us." But the seed of doubt once planted in Amelia's mind had now been transplanted to Adrian's. He looked at Chloe, really looked at her, and saw not a helpful assistant, but a woman who had just lied bizarrely and point-blank about his own family history. He didn't understand it, but it was a crack in the perfect image he had held of her. Meanwhile, Beatrice was receiving the first report from her private investigator, a man named Costello, whose nondescript appearance belied a ruthless talent for unearthing secrets. The preliminary findings were damning. Chloe Dubois had a pattern. 2 previous employers, both wealthy, powerful, and married, had divorced their wives within a year of hiring Chloe. In both cases, Chloe had briefly dated the men before receiving a substantial severance and moving on. She wasn't a home wrecker in the traditional sense. She was a corporate raider of families, engineering a crisis and then cashing out on the ensuing chaos. But Costello had found something more. Chloe wasn't just an opportunist. She had a deep personal connection to the world of wealth she so desperately wanted to inhabit. Her mother had been a housekeeper for a wealthy family in Greenwich, Connecticut, and had been summarily fired after being accused of theft. Chloe, then a teenager, had been humiliated. It wasn't just about money. It was about revenge. She wasn't just trying to conquer the Sterling family. She was trying to vanquish the ghosts of her own past. Beatrice read the report, her expression grim. The lies, the manipulations, it all clicked into place. Chloe wasn't just trying to replace Amelia. She was trying to become a better version of the women she felt had scorned her and her mother. Beatrice knew she couldn't just present this information to Adrian. He was defensive, and Chloe was an expert at spinning tales. No, she needed to catch the serpent in the act. She needed to stage an audience and the perfect moment for the truth to strike with the force of a thunderclap. And she knew just the occasion. The family dinner she had scheduled for the following evening. It was meant to be a quiet affair before the chaos of the baby shower. Now it would be a tribunal. The night of the dinner party, the air in the Sterling penthouse was electric with unspoken conflict. It wasn't a party. It was a battlefield, meticulously set for a final, decisive engagement. Beatrice had insisted on it being an intimate affair, just the 4 of them. Adrian, Amelia, Beatrice, and at Beatrice's pointed suggestion, Chloe. We must thank her for all her hard work on the gala seating chart. Beatrice had said, her voice smooth as silk. Adrian, still unsettled by the Samuel incident, but not yet fully comprehending the deception, had readily agreed. Chloe's invitation was to him a deserved honor. To Chloe, it was her coronation. To Amelia and Beatrice, it was a trap. Amelia felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. The revelation about the fabricated story had been a clarifying fire burning away her fear and self-doubt. She now saw Chloe's every move, every solicitous smile and concerned glance for what it was, a tactic. She sat at the magnificent rosewood dining table, wearing a simple navy blue dress that accentuated her pregnant form. Feeling not like a victim, but like a survivor awaiting the tide to turn. Chloe was a vision in blood-red silk. She radiated a triumphant energy, believing this dinner was the culmination of her efforts, a formal acknowledgement of her new indispensable role in the family. She had brought a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a pointedly expensive vintage she knew was Adrian's favorite. "A little something to celebrate," she'd said, handing it not to the housekeeper, but directly to Adrian, her fingers brushing his. The meal began a tense charade of civility. The clinking of sterling silver against fine china was jarringly loud in the quiet room. Chloe dominated the conversation, recounting anecdotes from the office that highlighted her competence and her intimate understanding of Adrian's world. She spoke of billion-dollar deals and corporate strategy, a language that subtly excluded Amelia. Adrian, caught in the middle, played the gracious host, attempting to bridge the palpable divide between the women. He directed questions to Amelia about the baby, but her answers were quiet and reserved. He complimented his mother's choice of caterer, but she merely inclined her head in acknowledgement. He was a man on a rapidly thinning patch of ice, sensing the cracks spreading beneath him, but refusing to look down. Emboldened by 2 glasses of the Margaux and her perceived success, Chloe began to overplay her hand. The conversation turned to the future, to the impending arrival of the sterling heir. "This penthouse is wonderful, of course," Chloe mused, gesturing vaguely with her wine glass. "But once the baby comes, you'll need more space, and perhaps a more traditional aesthetic. I saw a magnificent townhouse on the Upper East Side, a classic 6 with wonderful bones. It would be a true family home." Amelia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Chloe was redecorating her life, planning a future that didn't include her. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "We're very happy here, Chloe." "Of course," Chloe backpedaled smoothly. "Just thinking ahead. A strong family needs strong foundations." Her eyes met Beatrice's across the table, a flicker of a challenge in their blue depths. This was the moment Beatrice had been waiting for. She placed her napkin on the table. "Chloe, you are so very thoughtful," she said, her voice dangerously pleasant. "Speaking of foundations, I was just reviewing some old family trust documents in the library. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Would you be a dear and help me with some of the finer print?" Chloe preened. To be consulted on family trusts by the matriarch herself. This was the ultimate acceptance. "It would be my absolute honor, Beatrice," she said, rising from her chair. Adrian, relieved at the change in subject, had his phone buzz. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, looking at the screen. "It's the Tokyo office. I have to take this." He stood up and moved towards the large windows overlooking the glittering city, his back to the room. Beatrice led Chloe from the dining room into the adjoining library. The room was dark, panelled in rich walnut and smelling of old leather and paper. The only light came from a single green-shaded lamp on Adrian's desk. It created an intimate, conspiratorial atmosphere. Beatrice did not turn on any other lights. She walked towards a shelf, feigning a search for a document. "It is such a relief to have a woman of your capabilities around." Beatrice began her back still to Chloe. "Adrian is a brilliant man, but he can be so blind when it comes to emotional matters." Chloe, seeing an ally in the formidable old woman, felt a surge of adrenaline. The final piece of her plan was falling into place. She would win over the mother, and the kingdom would be hers. "I do my best," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "I worry about him. And Amelia. This pregnancy has been so difficult for her. She's just not the vibrant, strong woman he married anymore. He needs a partner who can stand with him, not someone he has to constantly care for." "My sentiment exactly," Beatrice said, turning slowly. Her face was half in shadow, her expression unreadable. A man like Adrian, a man who will one day control the entire Sterling legacy, needs a true partner, a powerhouse. Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. She let the mask of the caring assistant fall away, completely revealing the raw, naked ambition beneath. That's all I've ever wanted to be for him, she confessed, her voice thick with a twisted sincerity. I can support him in a way she never could. I understand his business, his pressures. I can be his partner in the boardroom and in the bedroom. I can give him more children, strong children to carry on the Sterling name. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, delivering what she believed would be the final checkmate move. And the truth is, Beatrice, Chloe said, a triumphant smile gracing her lips, I believe I'm already carrying his child. I'm pregnant. I was going to tell him tonight. Amelia's baby will have a brother or sister. Our family will be complete. She stood in the dim light of the library, glowing with her victory, confessing her entire treacherous plot to the one person she thought was her ally. She didn't notice that the heavy library door was not quite latched, left open by just a crack. She didn't see the shadow by the window in the dining room go utterly still. Adrian, having finished his call, had turned back just in time to hear Chloe's final devastating confession. Every word, every venomous, triumphant whisper had carried across the silent penthouse and landed on him like a physical blow. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered unheard onto the plush carpet. The face of the powerful CEO crumpled, replaced by the stunned, agonized expression of a man whose world had just been shattered by the two women he trusted most. The silence that followed Chloe's confession was absolute. For a horrifying second, the only sound in the library was the thumping of her own triumphant heart. She looked at Beatrice, expecting a conspiratorial smile, a nod of approval. Instead, she saw nothing. The old woman's face was a mask of cold, terrifying calm. "Is that so?" Beatrice said, her voice devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a judge pronouncing a sentence. Before Chloe could process the chilling shift in tone, Beatrice turned and walked back towards the dining room. Puzzled and suddenly deeply uneasy, Chloe followed. They re-entered the dining room to a scene of frozen horror. Amelia was staring at the library door, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. Adrian stood by the window, his back to them, his shoulders rigid. He turned around slowly, and the look on his face made Chloe's blood run cold. The affable, slightly oblivious man she had so expertly manipulated was gone. In his place was a stranger, his face a white-hot mask of betrayal and rage. "Adrian," Chloe began, her voice a weak imitation of its usual confidence. We were just talking." "I heard what you were talking about," Adrian said, his voice dangerously low. He took a step forward. Every single word. Chloe's mind raced desperately, searching for an escape route, a new lie to spin. She defaulted to her most practiced tactic, attack Amelia. "She's been poisoning you against me," Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Amelia. "This is her doing. She's a manipulative, paranoid liar. She's been jealous of my relationship with you from the beginning." Adrian flinched, as if struck. The guilt of his own blindness, of how he had dismissed Amelia's fears and embraced Chloe's lies, washed over him, fueling his fury. "You will not speak to my wife," he snarled. "Your wife!" Chloe laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "That weak, pathetic creature. I did you a favor. I was making you stronger, and I am carrying your child, Adrian, your son or daughter." She placed a hand on her flat stomach, her last desperate gambit. Amelia rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She had been silent, absorbing the raw, unfiltered truth of Chloe's evil. But she was not the weak woman Chloe had painted her to be. "No, you're not," Amelia said, her voice ringing with newfound strength and clarity. "You're lying, just like you lied about the seating chart, just like you lied about the name Samuel, just like you have lied about everything." Chloe stared at her, momentarily stunned by this display of defiance. She turned back to Adrian, her eyes pleading. "Adrian, darling, don't listen to her. It's the hormones making her crazy." It was the wrong thing to say. It was the phrase she had used to poison him, and hearing it now, knowing the truth, was like swallowing acid. But it was Beatrice who delivered the final devastating blow. She had stood by a silent, regal observer, watching the trap she had set spring with brutal efficiency. Now she moved. She walked not to Adrian, not to Amelia, but to the center of the magnificently set dining table. The table was a symbol of everything Chloe craved, the legacy, the stability, the power of the Sterling family. It was laden with fine, crystal gleaming silver and the remains of an expensive meal. "You speak of strength," Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of glass. "You speak of family. You know nothing of either." She methodically recounted every one of Chloe's deceptions she had witnessed. "You bought hydrangeas, knowing my son was allergic to create a rift. You spilled juice on a chart Amelia had already completed to make her look incompetent. You moved my son's belongings to establish a sense of intimacy that was not yours to claim. You have preyed on my daughter's vulnerability and my son's blindness. You are not a builder of families. You are a parasite." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, to spit more venom, but Beatrice held up a hand, silencing her. "And you are not pregnant," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a low, cold tone. "You have never been pregnant." She pulled a thin file from the pocket of her dress, the file from Costello, the private investigator. "I took the liberty of having your background checked, Miss Dubois," Beatrice continued. "A history of targeting wealthy men, 2 shattered marriages in your wake, and most recently, an online purchase from a novelty store in Ohio for a set of 3 realistic-looking positive pregnancy tests, delivered to your apartment last Tuesday." The color drained completely from Chloe's face. She was exposed, utterly and completely. She stared at Beatrice, her mind finally comprehending the scale of her miscalculation. She hadn't been seducing a weak old woman in the library. She had been confessing to her executioner. As the finality of her ruin washed over her, Chloe began to scream a torrent of vile insults, directed at them all, at Amelia's weakness, Adrian's stupidity, Beatrice's meddling. Beatrice listened, her expression unchanging. Then, with a sudden, shocking burst of primal force, she placed both her hands on the edge of the heavy rosewood table and shoved. It was an act of incredible raw power. The table flipped, a great groaning wave of wood crystal silver and food. Glasses shattered against the far wall. Dishes exploded on the marble floor. The expensive Chateau Margaux bled into the white silk rug like a mortal wound. The sound was a deafening roar, a cataclysm that ripped through the penthouse's suffocating silence. In the ensuing ringing quiet, amidst the complete and utter devastation of the room, Beatrice Sterling, matriarch and protector, stood tall, her eyes cold and fierce, locked onto Chloe's. "Get out of my house." Each word was a block of ice. It was not a request. It was an exorcism. Terrified, humiliated, and utterly broken, Chloe Dubois turned and fled. stumbling through the wreckage of her ambitions and out of their lives forever. The echo of the crashing table seemed to hang in the air long after the sound itself had died. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of pristine order, was now a scene of utter devastation. Shards of Waterford crystal glittered like malevolent diamonds, scattered across the floor. A river of dark, expensive wine soaked into the cream-colored silk rug, a wound in the very heart of the home. The scent of spilled food, wine, and something metallic. The smell of rage filled the opulent space. In the center of it all stood the three Sterlings, a shaken trinity amidst the wreckage. Maria, the family's long-serving housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a shock that bordered on terror. She saw the carnage, the shattered remnants of a life of luxury, and her gaze fell on her employers, expecting to see a similar chaos in them. But she didn't. Amelia was the first to move. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was followed by a deep, shuddering breath of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the exhale she had been holding for months. Adrian, galvanized by that sound, rushed to her side. He didn't just hold her. He enveloped her, trying to physically shield her from the fallout of his own catastrophic blindness. "Amelia," he breathed, his voice raw with a guilt that was a physical agony. "My God, look at what I let happen. What I let her do to you. To us." He pulled back his hands, framing her face, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for every time I came home late and didn't see the fear in your eyes. I'm sorry for the night I got angry about the hydrangeas. I'm sorry I believed you were just being hormonal. I'm sorry I let her poison my mind against you. I was a fool, a proud, arrogant fool, and my pride nearly cost me everything." He expected recrimination, anger, the bitter sting of an "I told you so." But the woman before him was not the fragile creature he had patronized. Her eyes, though tear-filled, were clear and steady. The true twist of the night wasn't the table flip. It was the revelation of his wife's hidden fortitude. "I knew Adrian," she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the broken room. "Well, I suspected. Deeply. For weeks." He stared, utterly bewildered. "What, Amelia? Why didn't you scream at me? Why did you let me be such an idiot?" A sad smile touched her lips. "Because I was scared," she confessed, her honesty brutal and clean. "I overheard a snippet of a phone call a month ago. The way she talked about you. It was possessive. Then I started watching. I saw how she'd subtly undermine me, how she'd find ways to be the hero while making me look helpless. I knew she was lying, but her lies were woven so perfectly into my own insecurities. She was a master at it." She took another breath, gathering strength. "I was terrified that if I launched an attack, a big, messy confrontation, you wouldn't believe me. She had laid the groundwork so perfectly to paint me as an unstable, pregnant mess. It would have been my word against hers. And at the time, I think you would have chosen to believe the one who made your life easier. The stress of that fight, of trying to convince my own husband that he was being deceived. I was terrified it would harm our son. So I decided to endure. I played my own game. I waited, and I watched, and I prayed she would make a mistake so enormous, so undeniable that even you wouldn't be able to look away." The weight of her words settled on Adrian, crushing him with the full understanding of her sacrifice. She had been fighting a war on her own, in silence, not just against Chloe, but against him, against his obliviousness, his dismissal. He had been an obstacle, not an ally. His love for her, once a comfortable, assured fact of his life, now felt like something he had to earn back, a precious, fragile thing he had nearly thrown away. He turned his gaze to his mother. Beatrice stood with the regal posture of a general, surveying a victorious but costly battlefield. She gave a calm, dismissive wave to the horrified housekeeper. "It's all right, Maria," she said, her voice perfectly level. "A slight disagreement. We will handle the cleanup. Please take the rest of the night off." Maria, looking immensely relieved to be excused from the emotional war zone, nodded and disappeared. Beatrice then walked over to the library entrance, her heels crunching softly on broken porcelain. She retrieved the thin manila file from where she had left it on a side table. She held it out to Adrian. "You should read this," she said. "I hired a man named Costello 3 weeks ago. My instincts told me something was deeply wrong, but in this world, instincts are not enough. One needs evidence." Adrian took the file with a trembling hand. He opened it, and his eyes scanned the first page. He saw the names of Chloe's previous employers, the timelines of their divorces, the large financial settlements. He saw the report on her childhood, the deep-seated resentment that fueled her ambition. Then he saw the last entry, the one his mother had quoted, a receipt from an online store for hyper-realistic positive pregnancy gag test. He looked at his mother, a new profound respect dawning in his eyes. He had seen her as a relic of a bygone era, a society matriarch concerned with appearances. He had failed to see the shrewd protective strategist who saw threats long before he did and moved to neutralize them with cold, calculated precision. He didn't need to speak. He closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her small, iron-willed frame. "Thank you," he murmured against her silver hair. Beatrice patted his back, a rare, soft gesture. "I protect what is mine, Adrian," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Your father built an empire of steel and glass, but he always told me that the true foundation was family. You do not let termites infest the foundation. You exterminate them. That is the sterling standard." In the weeks that followed, a quiet revolution took place within the sterling penthouse. The physical wreckage was cleared away in a day, but the emotional debris took longer to sweep clean. Adrian initiated a brutal restructuring of his life. He cancelled 2 multi-million-dollar deals that required extensive travel, delegating them with a trust he had never before shown in his subordinates. He fired not just Chloe, but 3 other senior staff members whose loyalty he now questioned, valuing character over ruthless efficiency. His days were no longer spent in boardrooms until midnight. They were spent with Amelia. They sat for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes in a comfortable silence that was more healing than words. He learned for the first time about the true depths of her loneliness. She learned about the crushing weight of legacy he carried. They unraveled the knots of deceit Chloe had tied around their marriage, and in their place they wove a new tapestry based on a radical, painful honesty. 2 months later, Samuel Adrian Sterling was born, his arrival heralding the true end of the siege. He was a healthy, beautiful baby with a thatch of his father's dark hair, and as Amelia tearfully pointed out, his grandmother's watchful, intelligent eyes. The final scene of the war was one of absolute peace. Months had passed. The city lights of a crisp autumn evening glittered outside the panoramic windows. Adrian sat on the sofa no longer in a bespoke suit, but in a soft grey sweater, their son asleep on his chest, a tiny hand curled around his finger. Amelia was curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, a novel lying open but forgotten in her lap. She was simply watching her husband and son, her face a portrait of contentment. Across the room, Beatrice sat in her customary wing-back chair, the blue baby blanket she had been knitting now draped over the sleeping infant. She wasn't knitting anymore. She was just watching her family that had been threatened, that had bent but had not broken. Adrian caught her eye and gave a small, grateful nod. She returned it with a faint, rare smile. The silence in the penthouse was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was light. It was warm. It was the sound of a hard-won peace, the unassailable strength of a family reforged in fire, protected by a mother's iron will, and secured by a love that had proven itself stronger than any lie. And so the Sterling Empire was saved not by a ruthless businessman, but by the quiet strength of a wife who refused to be a victim, and a mother who refused to see her family crumble. Amelia and Adrian, their love forged anew in the fires of betrayal, welcomed their son into a home finally free of deceit. Chloe's ambition led to her spectacular downfall, a cautionary tale whispered in the elite circles she so desperately wanted to conquer. What did you think of Beatrice's epic takedown? Do you believe a person's true character always reveals itself in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. A gasp rippled through the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi. All eyes were on the woman in crimson. Her hand still raised her face a mask of triumph. Before her, the gentle, pregnant wife of billionaire mogul Marcus Thorne stumbled a hand protectively, clutching her swollen belly, the imprint of a sapap blooming on her cheek. The city's elite watched breathless as the mistress, bold and unrepentant, declared her victory. But the real drama wasn't the public humiliation or the shattered illusion of a perfect marriage. The true bombshell was nestled deep inside the womb, a secret waiting to be revealed not by words, but by the frantic telling rhythm of a tiny unborn heart. Isabella Thorne believed her life was a fairy tale. At 26, she was the wife of Marcus Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with power in Southeast Asia's tech scene. Their love story was the stuff of legend, a whirlwind romance that saw a humble art curator marry into one of Hanoi's most influential families. Marcus was her everything charming, attentive, and fiercely protective. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Westlake, a wardrobe filled with bespoke creations from designers like Kong Tri, and a love that felt as solid as the ancient stones of the nearby Temple of Literature. Now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son, Isabella felt her world was complete. The nursery was a symphony of soft blues and creams filled with handcrafted toys and imported furniture. Marcus had been ecstatic, hosting lavish dinners to announce the heir to the Thorne Empire. He would often rest his hand on her belly, his eyes alight with a joy that seemed to mirror her own. "Our legacy, my love," he'd whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I do for you and for him." But lately, hairline cracks had begun to appear in the flawless facade of their life. Marcus was working later, his phone calls becoming more frequent and hushed. He'd attribute it to a new acquisition, a hostile takeover that required his undivided attention. Isabella, trusting and devoted, accepted his explanations. She'd wait for him, the chef-prepared meals growing cold on the polished mahogany table, her own reflection in the panoramic windows, her only company. The whispers started subtly, a shadow of a rumor caught in the clinking of champagne glasses at charity galas. A name, Camilla, was mentioned in hushed tones by women adorned in diamonds and envy. Isabella ignored them. The high society of Hanoi was a viper's nest of jealousy, and she, the ingenue, who had captured its most eligible bachelor, was the prime target. Camilla, as Isabella would soon learn, was Camilla Tran, a ruthlessly ambitious socialite and a former flame of Marcus's from his university days. While Isabella exuded a quiet, cultured grace, Camilla was a firestorm. Her laughter was loud, her dresses were daring, and her ambition was an open secret. She had recently returned to Hanoi after a stint in Singapore, and her re-entry into their circle was as subtle as a lightning strike. The first time Isabella felt a genuine pang of unease was at the annual Vietnam Innovators Gala, held at the opulent St. Regis Hanoi. Marcus, who was receiving the top award, was uncharacteristically distracted all evening. His eyes kept flitting towards the entrance, his grip on her hand just a fraction too tight. And then Camilla had arrived. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin. A stark, audacious slash of color in a sea of elegant pastels and classic blacks. She moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a panther, her gaze locking onto Marcus across the ballroom. Isabella saw the flicker of something in her husband's eyes. Not just recognition, but something deeper, more complicated. A ghost of a memory, a shared history that excluded her. Throughout the night she watched as Camilla artfully cornered Marcus, her hand lingering on his arm, her laughter echoing a little too loudly in their conversations. Marcus, for his part, seemed flustered, a state so alien to his usual composed demeanor that it set Isabella's nerves on edge. "She's just an old friend, darling," he had reassured her later that night, his voice smooth as silk. A bit intense but harmless. He had pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers, and for a moment the warmth of his embrace melted her fears. She wanted to believe him. To doubt Marcus was to doubt the very foundation of her world. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. A week later, a receipt for a lavish bouquet of black roses, a flower Isabella detested but knew was Camilla's favorite, fell out of his briefcase. He'd brushed it off as a corporate gift. Then there was the late-night text that buzzed on his phone, a simple "thinking of you" from a number he quickly deleted. The excuses became more elaborate, the distance between them growing from a hairline crack to a chasm. Isabella felt a profound and suffocating loneliness. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of her fairy tale life, now felt like a gilded cage. Her friends, mostly wives of Marcus's business associates, offered sympathetic but ultimately hollow words. They were part of this world. They understood its unspoken rules, the silent accommodations, the turning of a blind eye. But Isabella's heart, pure and perhaps a little naive, couldn't accept that. Love to her was not a transaction or an arrangement. It was a sacred, all-consuming truth. The pregnancy, once her greatest joy, now became a source of anxiety. She felt a desperate need to protect her unborn son, not just from the world, but from the encroaching shadows in her own home. She tried to talk to Marcus to break through the wall he was meticulously building around himself. "Is everything all right, Marcus?" she asked one evening, her hand on his arm as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He turned his face a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Just stress, my love. This deal is draining. Once it's over, it'll be just the three of us. I promise." He tilted her chin up and kissed her a perfunctory gesture that no longer reached his eyes. Isabella knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he was lying. The deal wasn't about business. The hostile takeover was happening right under her roof, and the enemy was not a rival corporation, but a woman in a crimson dress who smelled of black roses and broken promises. The fairy tale was over. Isabella was trapped, pregnant, and alone, standing on the precipice of a devastating truth, with no idea just how brutal the revelation would be. The breaking point arrived with an embossed, cream-colored invitation. The Thorn Corporation was celebrating its 50th anniversary with a grand ball. It was to be the social event of the season, a testament to the family's enduring legacy and power. For Isabella, it felt less like a celebration and more like a stage for the final act of her disintegrating marriage. In the weeks leading up to the event, Marcus was a whirlwind of activity, but his focus was sharp, his mood almost buoyant. He presented Isabella with a stunning midnight blue gown by a Parisian couturier and a sapphire necklace that mirrored the depths of West Lake. "You will be the most beautiful woman there," he said, his voice brimming with a sincerity she hadn't heard in months. "The mother of my son, the queen of my heart." For a fleeting, hopeful moment, Isabella allowed herself to believe him. Perhaps the affair, the whispers, the lies, had been a fleeting madness. Perhaps this night was his way of reaffirming their bond, of showing the world, and her, that she was the one who truly mattered. She pushed her anxieties down, focusing on the baby's gentle kicks, a secret language of reassurance between mother and child. The night of the ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi, was transformed into an enchanted forest from a Vietnamese folk tale. Thousands of orchids cascaded from the ceilings, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the low hum of high-powered conversations. Isabella on Marcus's arm was a vision of serene elegance. The deep blue of her gown complemented her pregnancy, and the thorn sapphires at her throat glittered with every turn of her head. She smiled. She mingled. She played the part of the perfect billionaire's wife, all while a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She knew Camilla would be there. It was inevitable. And sure enough, she saw her holding court by the champagne fountain, not in her usual audacious red, but in a startlingly white, almost bridal gown. The dress was a deliberate, provocative choice, an open challenge. Camilla's eyes found Isabella's across the room, and she offered a slow, deliberate smile that was anything but friendly. Marcus stiffened beside her. "Ignore her," he murmured, his grip on her elbow becoming possessive. "Tonight is about us." But Camilla had no intention of being ignored. As the night wore on, she seemed to be everywhere Isabella was. If Isabella moved to the terrace for a breath of fresh air, Camilla would appear moments later, her laughter sharp and piercing. If Isabella paused to speak with an acquaintance, Camilla would glide past her perfume, the cloying scent of black roses, leaving a toxic trail. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare, and it was working. Isabella's composure began to fray. The climax came just after the main speeches. Marcus had just delivered a moving tribute to his family and the future of his company, concluding with a toast to my beautiful wife, Isabella, and our son, who will one day lead this legacy. The room erupted in applause. Beaming Marcus turned to kiss her, a public display of affection designed to cement their image as the perfect couple. It was in that moment of manufactured bliss that Camilla made her move. She strode towards their central table, her white dress parting the sea of guests like the prow of a ship. There was no hesitation in her steps, no doubt in her eyes. The murmuring of the crowd died down as she approached a collective intake of breath, creating a vacuum of silence in the grand ballroom. She stopped directly in front of Isabella, who was still seated. Marcus, caught off guard, stood halfway, his smile frozen on his face. Legacy. Camilla's voice was clear and cold, slicing through the silence. Your son. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Marcus, you are a wonderful storyteller, but you seem to have forgotten the main character. She turned her venomous gaze on Isabella. You poor, pathetic little thing. Did you really believe all of it? The love story. The happy family. Isabella, stunned into silence, could only stare up at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What am I talking about? Camilla's voice rose, theatrical and cruel. I'm talking about the fact that the child you are carrying is not the only Thorn heir. I'm talking about the fact that Marcus has been with me in my bed every night he told you he was working late. Gasps rippled through the room. People were now openly staring their phones, discreetly raised to capture the unfolding drama. Marcus finally found his voice. Camilla, that's enough. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene, she shrieked, her composure finally cracking to reveal the raw fury beneath. You're the one who has been living a lie. You promised me, Marcus. You promised you would leave her. She then looked back at Isabella, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of pity and contempt. He was never going to leave me. This, she gestured at Isabella's belly, was just a little complication, an air for the public. But his heart, his passion, that belongs to me. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The faces of the guests blurred into a grotesque gallery of gawking masks. She looked at Marcus silently, pleading with him to deny it, to say something to defend her. But he stood there, his face pale, his eyes darting between the two women, a trapped animal. His silence was the only confession she needed. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, hot and shameful. She felt a protective instinct surge through her, a primal need to shield her son from this ugliness. She tried to stand to escape the suffocating scrutiny. Please, stop, she managed to say. But Camilla was not finished. She saw the tears, the vulnerability, and she went in for the kill. You think you've won? You think this baby solidifies your position? You are nothing but an incubator, a vessel. And then, with a movement so swift it seemed to surprise even herself, Camilla leaned forward and swung her arm. Crack! The sound was sharp and shockingly loud in the silent room. Isabella's head snapped to the side, the force of the blow sending a jolt through her entire body. A collective horrified gasp erupted from the onlookers. For a moment, there was only the stinging heat on her cheek and the stunned realization of what had just happened. Camilla the Mistress had slapped the pregnant wife of Marcus Thorn in front of everyone. Isabella stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, but her other arm wrapped instinctively, desperately around her stomach. The humiliation was a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole the air from her lungs. She looked at the faces around her, the shock, the pity, the morbid curiosity. She looked at Marcus, whose face was a canvas of horror and indecision, and then she looked at Camilla, who stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still tingling, a triumphant, hateful glare in her eyes. The fairy tale had not just ended, it had been violently, publicly, and irrevocably shattered. And as a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, Isabella realized the slap was not the most painful blow she would receive that night. The real agony was just beginning. The slap echoed in the cavernous ballroom, a definitive brutal end to the night's festivities. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tableau of shock and confusion. For a heartbeat, everyone, including Marcus, seemed frozen. Then the world lurched back into motion. Isabella, her mind reeling from the dual assault of humiliation and physical pain, felt her knees buckle. The sharp cramp in her lower abdomen intensified, radiating outwards in a wave of pure agony. A small, involuntary soul escaped her lips. "My baby," she whispered, her voice choked with terror. Her protective instinct overrode everything else. The shame, the anger, the betrayal. All that mattered was the tiny, precious life inside her. It was not her husband who caught her. It was his father, Arthur Thorne, the family patriarch, who had been watching from a nearby table with an expression of grim fury. He surged forward, his old but still powerful frame moving with surprising speed, catching Isabella's arm just as she was about to collapse. "Get her a chair! Someone call a doctor!" he bellowed, his voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralysis. "Isabella." He rushed to her side, his face a mess of panic and guilt. "My God, are you all right?" He reached for her, but she flinched away. Her eyes filled with more pain than he had ever seen meeting his. In that single searing glance, he saw the complete and utter destruction of her trust in him. Camilla, meanwhile, seemed to realize the enormity of her actions. The triumphant fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of panic. Assaulting anyone in this public manner was scandalous. Striking a pregnant woman was a cardinal sin, even in the morally flexible world of the super-rich. She took a half-step back, her gaze darting towards the exits. She had intended to cause a scene to force Marcus's hand, but this was spiraling out of control. I didn't mean," she began. But her words were cut off by Arthur Thorne's glacial stare. "You," he said, his voice low and lethally soft, "will not move an inch." Security. Two imposing men in dark suits materialized at his side. "Escort Ms. Tran to a private room, and do not let her leave." Camilla's face paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look at the unyielding fury in Arthur's eyes silenced her. Without another word, the guards flanked her and guided her away, her white dress now looking less like a bridal gown and more like a shroud. All focus was now on Isabella. She was gasping, her breaths coming in shallow, ragged pants. The cramping was getting worse. "It hurts," she cried, clutching her belly as if she could physically hold her son in place. "Marcus, it hurts." Despite her flinching away, her fear-driven instinct was to call out to the man she still on some level saw as her protector. Marcus, his face ashen, knelt before her. "I'm here, Isabella. I'm so sorry. We'll get you to the hospital." He tried to take her hand, and this time she let him, her fingers gripping his with a desperate strength. The St. Regis staff, trained for any contingency, moved with quiet efficiency. A makeshift screen was erected around the table, affording the Thornes a sliver of privacy from the hundreds of prying eyes. A medic who was on standby for the event was at Isabella's side, in moments taking her pulse, his face grim. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high. She's cramping. We need to get her to a hospital immediately." "The FV hospital is the closest, with a top-tier maternity ward," the medic announced, referring to the well-regarded Franco-Vietnamese hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, which had a prestigious branch in Hanoi. The logistics of the escape were a blur to Isabella. She was vaguely aware of being transferred to a wheelchair, of being wheeled through service corridors and down a private elevator away from the whispers and the stares. The journey was a torment of pain and fear. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through her. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, her hand never leaving her belly, whispering her son's name, a mantra against the encroaching darkness. Marcus sat beside her in the back of his Maybach, a silent, tormented figure. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man watching his world crumble due to his own weakness. He kept murmuring apologies, a litany of "I'm sorry, Isabella. I never wanted this. Please be okay." Isabella didn't respond. His words were meaningless static, the buzzing of a fly in a hurricane. The man whose promises had built her world had just stood by and watched it be demolished. His apologies were not for her. They were for himself. They were the desperate pleas of a guilty man trying to absolve himself, and she had no comfort to offer him. She felt a terrifying wetness between her legs, and a fresh surge of panic rose in her throat. "Something's wrong," she gasped, her eyes flying open and locking with his. "Marcus, something is wrong with the baby." The terror in her voice finally seemed to penetrate his self-pity. He barked at his driver. "Faster. For God's sake, drive faster." As the limousine sped through the glittering, indifferent streets of Hanoi, leaving the scene of her humiliation, far behind, Isabella felt a strange and chilling calm settle over her. The physical pain was immense, but it was the emotional agony that was truly defining. The slap had been a catalyst, a violent act that had shattered the gilded cage. But what echoed in its wake was not just the sound of a hand hitting skin, but the deafening silence of her husband's betrayal. It was the echo of a lie she had been living, a lie that was now threatening to cost her the only thing that mattered. She was no longer just fighting for her marriage or her dignity. She was fighting for her son's life. The emergency entrance of the FV hospital was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and urgent controlled chaos. A team was waiting, alerted by Arthur Thorne's influential call. Isabella was swiftly transferred from the wheelchair to a gurney, the transition jarring her body and eliciting another cry of pain. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, their voices a calm but urgent flurry of medical terminology. Pregnant, 26 weeks, presenting with severe abdominal cramping and signs of bleeding following a physical altercation. BP is 160/100. Tachycardic. Get her to the maternity ward, stat prep for an ultrasound. We need to check for placental abruption. Marcus was shunted to the side, rendered powerless and irrelevant by the medical professionals who now held his wife's and child's lives in their hands. He stood in the corridor, his tuxedo looking absurdly out of place, his hands stained with a small amount of Isabella's blood where he had tried to comfort her. He watched as they wheeled her away, her hand still protectively on her belly, her face pale and etched with fear. The doors swung shut behind her, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his guilt. Inside the examination room, the atmosphere was tense. Isabella was gently helped into a hospital gown, her beautiful midnight blue dress unceremoniously cut away. The pain was a constant, terrifying rhythm. A kind-faced, middle-aged female doctor, Dr. Lian, introduced herself as the head of obstetrics. "Isabella, my name is Dr. Lian. We're going to take very good care of you and your baby," she said, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. "We need to do an ultrasound to see what's happening. I need you to try and stay as still as possible." Isabella nodded, tears streaming silently down her temples. Is my baby going to be okay? We're doing everything we can to ensure that Dr. Lyanne said, her reassuring tone never wavering, though her eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. "Let's have a look." The room fell silent as the ultrasound technician applied the cold gel to Isabella's stomach. All that could be heard was the soft whirring of the machine and Isabella's ragged breathing. She stared at the monitor, her heart pounding in her ears, praying for a sign, for a flicker of hope. The technician moved the transducer across her abdomen, the grey and black images swirling on the screen. Dr. Lien's eyes were narrowed in concentration, her brow furrowed. Marcus, who had finally been allowed in after an agonizing wait, stood in the corner, looking on helplessly. "There's the baby," Dr. Lien said softly. "He's small, but he's a fighter." Isabella let out a choked sob of relief. "He was alive. But I am seeing some cause for concern." The doctor continued, her tone becoming more clinical. "There appears to be a small subchorionic hematoma, likely caused by the trauma and the spike in your blood pressure. It's a bleed. That's what's causing the pain and the spotting. We need to monitor it very closely. But he'll be okay." Marcus's voice was hoarse from the sidelines. Dr. Lyanne didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on her patient. "The immediate danger is preterm labor. The stress and physical shock could trigger contractions. We're going to give you medication to stop them and a steroid shot to help the baby's lungs develop just in case." As she spoke, the technician adjusted a setting on the machine, and a new sound filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of the baby's heartbeat amplified by the machine. It was fast, a frantic galloping rhythm, but it was strong. It was the most beautiful sound Isabella had ever heard. Tears of relief streamed down her face. It was the sound of life, of hope. Dr. Lien smiled for the first time. A strong heartbeat. "That's a very good sign. A little fast, he's clearly stressed, but strong." Marcus stepped forward, a wave of relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he breathed. The technician continued her work, taking measurements, capturing stills of the tiny profile, the little fists. Dr. Liang was explaining the course of treatment, complete bed rest, constant monitoring, when the technician suddenly paused. She zoomed in on one particular area of the screen, her own brow furrowing in a way that had nothing to do with the hematoma. "Doctor," she said quietly, pointing to the screen. "Could you look at this?" Dr. Lyan leaned in, her professional gaze sweeping over the area the technician indicated. The room fell silent again. The baby's amplified heartbeat, the only sound. For a long moment, Dr. Lien said nothing. She simply stared at the image, her expression shifting from professional concern to one of utter bewilderment. "What is it?" Isabella asked, a fresh spike of fear piercing her relief. "Is something else wrong?" Dr. Lien turned from the monitor and looked at Isabella, then at Marcus, and then back to Isabella. Her face was a complex mask of confusion and something else, something that looked like disbelief. "Run the Doppler again," she instructed the technician. "Amplify it." The technician complied. The thump-thump sound filled the room once more. But this time the technician moved the transducer just a few centimeters, and then another sound joined the first. Thump-thump. 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 It was a second heartbeat, distinct, separate, yet beating in an almost identical, frantic rhythm. It was unmistakable. The room, which had been filled with one frantic heartbeat, was now filled with the sound of two. Isabella stared at the screen, then at the doctor, her mind unable to process the sound. "What is that?" Marcus stepped closer to the screen, his eyes wide with confusion. Is that an echo? What's wrong with the machine? Dr. Lyon slowly shook her head, her eyes still locked on the monitor where two tiny, flickering forms were now visible. She looked up at Isabella, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Thorne, there is nothing wrong with the machine. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to announce something utterly impossible. Isabella, you're not carrying one baby. She pointed a trembling finger at the screen, at the two distinct sacs, at the two tiny, flickering hearts, beating in terrified unison. You're having twins. The revelation hung in the air, a fact so stunning, so completely unexpected, that it defied all logic. All the previous scans conducted by a top society doctor chosen by Marcus had shown only one baby. One boy. The heir. Marcus had been there every time, beaming as he looked at the grainy image of his son. A wave of dizziness washed over Isabella. Twins. How was that possible? They had done scans at 8 weeks, 12 weeks and the detailed anatomy scan at 20 weeks. All had shown one baby, a single, healthy boy. Then a darker, more insidious thought began to form in the recesses of her mind, born from the night's catastrophic betrayals. She looked at Marcus, whose face was not filled with the joy of an unexpected blessing, but with a ghostly pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. His expression was not one of confusion. It was the look of a man whose carefully constructed lie had just been blown apart by the most undeniable, most irrefutable truth of all. The society doctor, the man he had chosen, the insistence on it being a boy, the unwavering certainty. But all the other scans? She began, her voice trembling as the horrifying implication began to dawn on her. Dr. Pham always said. He said it was just one. Marcus couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the screen at the two heartbeats that had just exposed him, his mind clearly racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And in that moment, Isabella understood. The slap the affair, the public humiliation that was just the prelude. This was the true betrayal. It wasn't just a simple case of infidelity. It was a deception so profound, so calculated, that it had targeted the most sacred space in her life, her own body, her own children. Dr. Lien, sensing the monumental shift in the room, spoke gently. Sometimes a twin can be hidden, tucked behind the other, especially if the sonographer isn't specifically looking. But at 26 weeks, it's unusual to miss. Very unusual. Her carefully chosen words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. The two heartbeats continued their frantic rhythmic drumming, a sound that was no longer just a sign of life, but a declaration of war. They were the beat of a truth that could not be silenced, a truth that revealed that Marcus Thorne had not just lied about his mistress, he had lied about the very nature of the legacy he claimed to cherish. Isabella was not just carrying his heir. She was carrying a secret he had desperately, and for reasons she couldn't yet fathom, tried to conceal. And now, thanks to the violent act of his mistress, that secret was out. Everything had changed. The revelation of the second heartbeat did not bring joy. It detonated in the sterile hospital room like a silent, devastating bomb, obliterating the last vestiges of Isabella's shattered reality. The sound of the two tiny hearts beating in unison was a testament not to a miracle, but to a monstrous, calculated deception. Isabella lay on the hospital bed, the doctor's words echoing in her ears. You're having twins." She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him for the first time since the news broke. The panic on his face was undeniable, but it was laced with something else. The cold, hard glint of a man cornered. It was the look of a king whose carefully constructed kingdom had just been set ablaze. "You knew," she whispered, her voice devoid of tears, stripped bare to a chilling monotone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. "You knew, and you lied." Marcus flinched, as if she had slapped him. "Isabella, no, how could I have known? It's a surprise, a blessing." His attempt at feigned delight was pathetic, a transparently false performance that was an insult to her intelligence. "A blessing." Her voice rose, laced with a hysterical edge. "You stood there at every appointment with Dr. Pham, your hand-picked physician, looking at the screen and telling me about our son, the Thorn heir. Was he in on it too? Did you pay him to lie to erase one of our children from existence?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Dr. Lyon and the technician suddenly became very busy, averting their eyes, offering the illusion of privacy where none existed. "That's a crazy accusation," Marcus stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time all night. "Why would I do that? Why would I hide one of my own children? I don't know." Isabella's voice cracked, the raw pain finally breaking through her shock. "Maybe one was a boy and one was a girl, and you only wanted the boy. Maybe you have some sick, twisted reason. I can't even begin to imagine. But you knew. Your shock wasn't surprise, Marcus. It was the terror of being caught." The two heartbeats, still thumping steadily from the monitor, served as a relentless rhythmic jury. Thump, 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 thump. Guilty. Guilty. Before Marcus could formulate another lie, the door opened and his father, Arthur Thorne, swept in. The patriarch's face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. He had clearly been briefed. He took in the scene, Isabella pale and trembling with fury on the bed, Marcus cornered and sweating, the damning image still frozen on the ultrasound screen. Arthur's gaze fell on his son, and the disappointment in his eyes was so profound it was almost a physical force. "I have just had a very enlightening conversation with the hospital administrator," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "And I took the liberty of placing a call to your Dr. Pham. A very nervous man, Dr. Pham. It seems his records from your last scan have been misplaced." Marcus visibly paled. The unspoken threat was clear. The Thorne family's reach was long, and a doctor who participated in such a fraud would have his career destroyed. "Father, this is a misunderstanding." Marcus began, his voice pleading. "Silence," Arthur commanded, and Marcus, for all his billions and his power, obeyed like a chastened child. Arthur walked to Isabella's bedside. His expression softened as he looked at her, a flicker of genuine compassion in his hardened eyes. "Isabella," he said gently, "I am profoundly sorry for the humiliation you suffered tonight and for this unforgivable deception. Whatever my son has done, the Thorne family will not abandon you or your children." He glanced at the monitor, a flicker of wonder crossing his face at the sight of the two distinct forms. Two potential heirs. He then turned his full attention back to Marcus, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You will tell me why. You will tell me why you would deny your own blood. Now." trapped between his furious father and his devastated wife. Marcus finally broke. The lies, the bravado, the carefully maintained facade. It all crumbled. He slumped into the chair in the corner, his head in his hands. It was complicated, he mumbled. Complicated does not suffice when you are lying to your wife about the existence of your child, Arthur thundered. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of desperation. It was Camilla, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She's pregnant too. The air was sucked out of the room. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea so intense she thought she would be sick. It was a betrayal on a scale she could never have conceived. I found out a few months ago Marcus continued the confession, tumbling out of him in a torrent of self-pitying misery. She claimed it was mine. She threatened to go public to ruin everything. The anniversary, the launch of the new subsidiary. The timing was a disaster. She wanted me to leave you to marry her. She was obsessed. And your solution was to lie to everyone Arthur demanded. I was buying time. Marcus insisted, standing up, pacing like a caged animal. I didn't know if her baby was even mine. I told her I'd handle it. My plan, my stupid, idiotic plan, was to secure the legitimate heir. Our son. He looked at Isabella. I needed to establish his primacy. A single male heir. It was clean, powerful. It would cement our family line and make Camilla's claim if she made it seem like a desperate, pathetic ploy from a scorned mistress. The chilling logic of his plan began to dawn on Isabella. And a second baby, a twin, complicated, that she said, her voice hollow. It muddied the waters, he exclaimed, almost angry that she was making him admit it. 2 babies. It made it seem messy, less definitive. And what if one was a girl? It would weaken my position. I told Farm to just focus on the boy, to omit the other one from the official reports, just for a little while. I was going to reveal the surprise twin later, after Camilla's situation was neutralized. I swear it, Isabella. I would never have denied our child forever. It was a temporary, strategic deception. A strategic deception. Isabella repeated the words, tasting their poison. You erased our child from our lives for strategy. You made me believe I was only carrying one baby, grieving a loss. I didn't even know I had all to manage your sordid affair. The sheer cold-blooded calculus of it was breathtaking. He had weighed his children on a scale of public relations and corporate strategy and found one of them wanting. He hadn't just cheated on her, he had played God with their unborn children. Arthur Thorne looked at his son with utter contempt. You are a fool, Marcus. A weak, short-sighted fool. You have taken a crisis and turned it into a cataclysm. You have dishonored your wife, your name, and your own unborn children, all to appease a venomous viper you were too weak to discard. He turned back to Isabella, his decision made. Isabella, you will want for nothing. The full resources of the Thorne family are at your disposal. You and your children will be protected. As for you, Marcus, he said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. You are relieved of all your duties at Thorne Corporation, effective immediately. Your assets are frozen. You will go to the country house, and you will not leave until I summon you. You have made your bed of lies. Now you will lie in it. Alone. The verdict was absolute. In the space of a few hours, Marcus Thorne had gone from the king of Hanoi's business world to a dethroned, disgraced exile. He stared at his father, then at his wife, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. There was nothing left to say. His lies had unraveled, and in doing so had unraveled him completely. Isabella watched him feeling not a shred of pity, only a vast, empty coldness, where her love used to be. The man she had married was a stranger, a moral void, hidden behind a handsome face and a charming mouth. The trauma of the night, the slap the terror had forged something new inside her. The meek, trusting art curator was gone. In her place was a mother of two, a woman who had been pushed to the absolute limit and had found not an abyss but a core of steel. The two heartbeats on the monitor continued their steady, strong rhythm. They were the only truth left in the room. They were her truth. And she would protect them and herself with a ferocity that Marcus and his mistress could not possibly comprehend. The war was just beginning. The week that followed was a cocoon of enforced tranquility and simmering rage. Isabella remained at the FV hospital not just for medical reasons, but for sanctuary. Her suite was transformed into a command center, a fortress from which she would plan her counter-offensive. The hematoma was stable, the risk of preterm labor had subsided, and the two tiny heartbeats that had upended her world grew stronger each day. They were her fuel, her purpose. Arthur Thorne was true to his word. He visited daily, not with the overbearing authority of a patriarch, but with the quiet deference of an ally. He saw in Isabella not a fragile victim, but the future matriarch of his legacy, the guardian of not one but two of his grandchildren. He provided her with the best legal team in Vietnam, a group of sharp, merciless lawyers who specialized in high-stakes divorces. "Spare no expense," Arthur had told them in Isabella's presence. "I want this handled with the subtlety of a guillotine, clean, final, and entirely in Ms. Isabella's favor." Marcus was gone, banished to a remote Thorne estate in the highlands of Darlat. His name was scrubbed from the corporate website his office cleared out. The official story, meticulously crafted by Arthur's PR team, was that Marcus had stepped down for personal health reasons to focus on his family during a difficult pregnancy. The story was just plausible enough to quell the rampant speculation. But the real story, the one whispered in the boardrooms and elite social circles, was that the king had been ruthlessly deposed. Camilla Tran was also dealt with. Arthur's investigators had worked with surgical precision. They uncovered her own web of debts and deceit. The pregnancy she claimed, it was real. But a discreetly obtained DNA test from a coffee cup she'd used at a cafe proved what Arthur had suspected: the baby wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to a married Singaporean businessman she had been seeing concurrently. Armed with this proof, Arthur's lawyers presented her with a simple, non-negotiable choice: disappear quietly, with a modest one-time settlement and a signed NDA, or face public exposure fraud charges and the unmitigated wrath of the Thorne family. Camilla, a pragmatist above all else, took the deal and vanished from the Hanoi social scene as quickly as she had appeared. But for Isabella, these victories were peripheral. Her focus was singular. It wasn't about revenge on Camilla, or even about punishing Marcus anymore. It was about reclaiming her narrative and securing an unassailable future for her children. During her days in the hospital, she began to change. The soft, deferential woman who had once organized art exhibitions was replaced by a shrewd, calculating strategist. She devoured the financial reports her lawyers brought her, learning about trust funds, share allocations, and corporate governance. She had once loved Marcus for his charm and ambition. Now she studied the architecture of the empire he had built, not with admiration, but with the critical eye of a conqueror. Her gambit when she finally revealed it to her lawyers and a stunned but impressed Arthur Thorne was audacious. "I don't want a simple divorce settlement. she announced one afternoon, her voice clear and steady. The hospital suite was bathed in the soft afternoon light, and she was propped up in bed, surrounded by financial documents looking more like a CEO than a patient. "I don't want cash or property or alimony." Her lead lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Vi, raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Isabella, given the circumstances, the infidelity, the public assault, the staggering fraud regarding the children, you are entitled to one of the largest settlements in this country's history. A settlement makes me a pensioner of the Thorne family," Isabella stated calmly. "It makes me a wealthy victim. I have no interest in being a victim." She looked directly at Arthur. "Marcus's shares in Thorne Corporation, his voting rights, his seat on the board. I want them transferred to a trust that I control as the sole trustee for the benefit of my children." Arthur stared at her, his expression unreadable. Ms. Vi's jaw practically dropped. Isabella was not asking for a piece of the pie. She was demanding control of the bakery. "He will never agree to that," Ms. Vi said. "That's his identity, his life's work." "He will agree," Isabella said, with chilling certainty, "because the alternative is that I don't sign a non-disclosure agreement. The alternative is that I give a full exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal. I will tell them everything about the affair, about the public assault by his mistress, and about the meticulous medically assisted fraud he perpetrated to hide the existence of one of his own children for strategic gain." She let the threat hang in the air. It was mutually assured destruction. The scandal would not just destroy Marcus's reputation permanently. It would taint the Thorne Corporation name for a generation. It would cause shareholder panic, invite regulatory scrutiny, and become a legendary case study in corporate malfeasance and moral bankruptcy. "I will detail how Dr. Pham was pressured to falsify medical records." She continued, her eyes locked on Arthur. "I will explain that my husband's immediate reaction to discovering he was having twins was not joy, but terror at his lie being exposed. I will paint a picture of a man and a corporate culture so obsessed with a clean, powerful narrative of a single male heir that it was willing to deny a child's very existence." Arthur remained silent, his steepled fingers covering his mouth. He was a ruthless businessman, and he recognized the move for what it was, a brilliant, perfectly executed checkmate. Isabella had found his single greatest weakness, his obsession with the family legacy. She was using the sanctity of that legacy which Marcus had so carelessly desecrated as her ultimate weapon. She wasn't threatening to take his money. She was threatening to burn his kingdom to the ground. Finally, he spoke, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "He'll sign," Arthur said, nodding to Ms. Vi. "Draw up the papers." The meeting with Marcus was arranged a week later, after Isabella was discharged and settled into a new, secure penthouse, one chosen and paid for by her from an advance on the trust. The location was neutral, a private conference room at the Sofitel Legend Metropole Hanoi, a place of old-world power. Isabella walked in not as a victim, but as an equal. She was no longer pregnant and hiding behind flowing dresses. She had given birth 2 days prior to 2 small but healthy babies, a boy Leo and a girl Luna. The birth had been premature but uncomplicated. Her body was tired, but her spirit was forged in iron. Marcus was already there, flanked by his own lawyer. He looked diminished, a ghost of his former self. The tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He hadn't seen Isabella or his children since the night at the hospital. He stood when she entered. Isabella, I heard about the babies. Are they? They are fine, she said, her voice cool and professional, cutting him off. She did not take the offered seat across from him, but remained standing, a silent assertion of power. No thanks to you. She gestured for Ms. Vi to present the documents. Marcus's lawyer read through them, his eyes widening with each clause. He leaned over and whispered frantically to his client. Marcus just shook his head, a broken man. This is everything, he whispered, looking at Isabella. My shares, my seat, my entire life. You have a life, Isabella retorted, her voice sharp as glass. You have one because I am choosing not to scorch the earth. I am choosing to protect the family name for the sake of my children. This is not a punishment, Marcus. It is a consequence. You proved you are not fit to be the steward of this legacy. So now I will be. She finally sat down, her gaze unwavering. You will have supervised visitation rights. You will be provided with a generous allowance, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to cause trouble. You will, for all intents and purposes, retire from public life. In return, the world will remember you as the man who stepped down for his family. It's a better legacy than the one you were building. You should thank me. There was a long, heavy silence. Marcus looked at the documents, then at his ex-wife, the woman he had so grievously underestimated. He saw not the gentle girl he had married, but an empress in the making. He had created her, in a way. His betrayals had been the fire, and she had walked out of it reborn, holding his entire world in her hands. With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne, the deposed king, picked up the pen. He signed away his power, his company, and his future, all to the steady, silent rhythm of 2 tiny heartbeats he had once tried to erase. The Empress's gambit had succeeded, and so the story of the slap that shocked Hanoi's elite took its final stunning turn. It was never just about a mistress's fury or a husband's infidelity. It was about a deception that ran to the very heart of a family and the quiet, unassuming wife who rose from the ashes of public humiliation to seize control of an empire. Isabella Thorne, once a footnote in her husband's story, became the author of her own rewriting her destiny, not with tears, but with shrewd intelligence and the unyielding power of a mother's love. She proved that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful move is not to destroy your enemies, but to simply take everything they hold dear. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Was it justice or the most brilliant revenge? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.